Welcome to Embracing Autism IRL. Today's episode is not for the faint of heart, and that's exactly why you need to hear it. We're pulling back the curtain on something many families quietly fear, but few are openly talking about. What happens when the system that's supposed to protect our autistic kids starts to fail them? With growing pressures from federal mandates, legal action like the recent 504 lawsuit, and a society that still avoids the word disability, we're diving into a conversation that's as uncomfortable as it is necessary. My guest today is Jean Mayer, co-host of Moms Talk Autism podcast and a powerhouse advocate, single mom, animal lover, and school board trustee who's been on the front lines of both parenting and policy. She's seen firsthand how disability is treated not just in the home, but in boardrooms, classrooms, and courtrooms. So buckle up because this episode might challenge what you think you know, but it might also change how you advocate for your child forever. Jean, welcome to Embracing Autism.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me. I really am so delighted to be here and have this very important conversation. Anytime we can have these conversations, I think any kind of level of advocacy can seem really intimidating to a lot of families and parents because, it's not like we don't already have enough to deal with. So
I know, right?
Yes.
So before we dive into the heavy stuff, because I know there's going to be lots of heavy stuff here, tell us a little bit more about what life looks for you right now. Your kids, your animals, for people who might not be familiar with you, your advocacy work, stuff like that.
So life is pretty full and vibrant. And very layered, I should say, raising two incredible kids. My son, Rory, is 11. He is my autistic kiddo, full range of all different types of diagnoses that go along with that: ADHD, intellectual disability, apraxia, anxiety. He has, eating issues, and he's sleep disordered. So we have like the whole host of things. However, he is still a huge, despite those challenges, huge bright spot. Like Rory is very well accepted on his school campus. He's known as the GOAT of his class, greatest of all time. And even across the entire school campus, all the school teachers I even went to an event the other night, and someone came over and said, "Oh, you're Rory's mom," which I love being known as Rory's mom and not anyone else. Like, if you just know me as Rory's mom first, that's the most important thing. And so that was very telling right there, in that exchange. But he's very well loved by staff and peers alike. And he really just kind of lights up any room he walks into. And that wasn't always the case. And he is what be considered more profoundly autistic. So he's been mainstream. My daughter McKenna is 9, pretty much considered a professional gymnast at this point. The training schedule that she has, that she keeps up with in addition to school, is pretty intense. She's also a recipient of special education. She has a 504 plan due to conditions that causes quite a bit of migraines that she struggles with. And we have plenty of animals in our home. I have nothing short of a miniature zoo. They're a daily reminder of unconditional joy that can even exist, even in the hardest of times. I'm a big proponent of joy and grief and hardships all kind of coexisting at the same time. We kind of aren't really, we kind of always think they have to be siloed or separate, and they actually just kind of happen all simultaneously together. I serve as a school board trustee in my school district, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Moms Talk Autism podcast, and a very active advocate for special education policy here in the state of Texas. But really my most important role, as I mentioned before, is being a mom. And I tend to find myself, because this is important and we forget about this, is you can get burnout real quick with all of those multiple hats, right? And being the kind of parents that we are, and any additional responsibilities. So you need to recharge yourself. So I tend to try to do that through humor as much as possible. Food and shared conversations, what I call breaking bread. To me, it's not just about eating or getting your basic needs met. There's a true exchange of oxytocin that's very bonding and restorative. And there's sort of a sacredness and that anything kind of that would be considered ordinary is that, and that can center you. And so often, especially in like the hustle and bustle of daily life, and you're just like shoving food down your throat just to, satisfy your hunger so you don't die, you kind of forget that, no, you need to like slow down. And so huge proponent of that.
So let's break some virtual bread.
Yes.
um,
Love that.
so you just rattle off so much that you're involved with. I can definitely relate to some of that because I do like local advocacy stuff, and it does feel like a lot of like nonprofits and everything that I've seen, it feels like most of those end up initially being created by parents. So I was just wondering, what was that moment for you that lit that fire for you to become not just an advocate, but someone who's actively shaping public policy?
That is a great question. And I've been getting it a lot lately and trying to define that for other parents. Like, first, it is something angry, you're mad, you're angry, something happened, right? But anger itself is really not sustainable. You have to find other ways to kind of propel you forward. But what was so maddening at that time is you immediately, once you guys saw the gaps, like you could see the holes in the system. And it's like, and being a mom, as soon as we, ventured onto this path, whether we're looking at the medical side of things and especially down the educational side, you're just like, these people in this room do want to help. They are limited within the scope in which they are able to do that. So how are we ever going to fix that? I also saw, and I think it's evident if you're even looking at things that where they currently are, where matters currently are, I see a huge disconnect. It's almost like there's 3 buckets. There could be more buckets than this, but just for the sake of conversation, you have a bucket of parents like us who understand disability and feel very comfortable talking about disability. You have a bucket of folks that maybe have a heart for it, but they don't know how to talk about it, and they're kind of fumbling through and they don't know. And then you have the whole other bucket of everyone else that's just like, it is not on their radar, or they don't care, or it's just, and then that doesn't help perpetuate the other buckets at all. And it's like total misalignment. And so I saw systems in place that seemed like a checklist, and it kind of was dehumanizing. Just was like, my kid is a human, it's a person as well. And he's a full human being who deserved dignity and not denial, not being denied access to the things that he needed or was deserving of. I realized if we were not at the table, we were on the menu. And so you just had to from there, just kind of rise up. And it's little by little. It's not like there was this immediate, like, clear pathway. It's, you start by turning over rocks, and those rocks reveal maybe another path or something that you need to kind of go down to further dig into. So
that's definitely been similar to the journey that I've kind of experienced. And I've noticed as my kids have gotten into the school system and the more involved I get, the more I find out not necessarily for the best. And so like that's definitely been part of what's been propelling my advocacy work too, is because there is a lot of bureaucracy and like red tape and all this stuff that just makes it so impossible for our kids to get their needs met and get what they actually are entitled to. So I wanted to ask you, because we're having a conversation here that for us is very comfortable, but a lot of people are hesitant to talk about this. And it's because there seems to be this huge discomfort or taboo in our society around using the word disability. Even some people who are disabled or have disabilities themselves don't want to identify as disabled. So why do you think that that word carries so much weight? And how does that affect our ability to show up for our kids?
Oh, I think there's a lot of cultural discomfort around imperfection in general. So it's not this neat, clean narrative. But it's like where people put disability kind of, or just anything kind of into these binary boxes, right? So we want its disability to either be an inspiration or a tragedy. And either way, neither one of them tells the full story. And disability carries the weight because we haven't normalized difference. It's like we're not okay with something being different. It's a total human experience to be different. It's a human experience to also be disabled. You're still a whole person. But saying disability out loud is also the first steps towards truly seeing our kids. And I think a lot of us don't even realize that when we are the parent that steps into that role. Like we don't realize that because we're not groomed for this as a society. At that moment, that's where the first time you're confronted with, what are my beliefs on this? Because you don't realize how things are just so interwoven and just our being as moving into adulthood. Like it's not, but then, as you move on to the other steps of parenting, becoming a parent, it moves you through a trajectory of like, well, this happens and this happens and this is what these milestones look like. And it seems very like linear, and it is. If there's anything that really messes up any of that linear projection of what people have in their mind, is their child has a medical complexity that they did not anticipate because they thought they're going to have this, what they call a normal kid. And so they just, it's captured as soon as that happens, they see less than. And it's actually, instead of, if we change the perspective, is just having different access needs. They need different things to be able to access the world. And I think there's this belief too that, oh, well, when you get those things, those will be granted to you. And you're just like, nope, that's not what happens over here. Like, you're like, no, actually their job is to tell us no. And that was a hard thing to be with too. As a parent, you're just like, I have to deal with being told no a lot.
Yeah. I think the other misconception is that sometimes people think that an accommodation is also like a fix. So they think that if the child is provided an accommodation, then they are no longer disabled in that area. And I think that that's also kind of like harmful thinking, because a lot of times people kind of become dismissive when it comes to that. Like, oh, you have your accommodations, you're fine. Have you seen that or experienced that?
Yes. And I experience it quite a bit, just in like, even dealing from on a policy standpoint, or even as a trustee when dealing with, vendors or contractors or looking at projects, and they're like, oh, but we're ADA compliant. Oh, love, ADA is just the floor. It is not the ceiling. And so I wish more people understood that. But also still furthermore, why ADA is so incredibly important. We don't want to backslide from that. We want to keep improving what that looks like. And so, yeah, I do. I think that happens all the time. They're like, oh, well, we gave you that. Well, thank you for my parking spot and my ramp and the braille.
At federally funded facilities only. Like nobody else is like required to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's real cool. So cool right now.
So there is a lot of buzz right now going around, and a lot of anxiety around the recent pressures from the federal government and the implications of this 504 lawsuit going around. I haven't caught up to the most recent updates on that, so I don't know if anything's really changed. But from your perspective as a school board, on the school board, what are some real consequences that families might face that we need to be preparing for now or thinking about now?
This more simple answer to something that's extremely complex is that you can much guarantee at this point there's more gatekeeping coming, meaning it's going to be harder to get access to things. Does that mean that necessarily our rights are going to be totally walked back? No, not totally. Is it possible? Yes. That also comes with the burden of needing to provide more proof that our kids need these supports, the emotional burden that it takes and the toll it has on families. Districts are then enforced to cut back accommodations. And so it's like now having to potentially deal with that. And what it's going to require, and this is sad because is that families are going to be required to become more savvier about written documentation and their legal protections. And, some parents haven't even caught up to just where we were before all this kind of started to kind of take place. And so that seems demoralizing and deflating. Like I know that, especially because it's exhausting. But they do, and I will say this, these systems count on us being silent. They count on our silence. They count on us not really being able to step up. But what I'm worried about most, and I have written about this in a couple other entries I have, is that what I've seen is that they weaponize our pain. And not just by politics, but policies that shrink access when families are too tired to keep pushing. Or it's to suit their agenda on the other side, right? And it's actually going to have unintended consequences, like what our lovely Health and Human Services exec cabinet member had said just recently, and that's frightening. To be going down that way. Why there's one thing for families who are really struggling to feel like they need to be seen, but they don't realize the danger in that is people use our desperation, our need to want to cling to anything that resembles hope, because they're living in a world of nevers. They think, oh, this sounds great. Like, oh, there's people that are actually going to help us. Or no, it just is going to take larger awareness. And so it's just kind of paying attention. One of the best things that you can do for starting out is just pay attention to what's happening. Be curious, stay curious, question what people's motives might be, and really think about what it is your family needs.
So one of the things that you kind of mentioned there was like services kind of being pulled back. I know, like for me, like I was one of those adults that relied on the accommodations, work accommodations, and I had to actually go through a disability discrimination lawsuit process and all that stuff myself. I have an autism and ADHD diagnosis. And so one of the things that some parents are kind of talking about is this kind of fear around talking too openly about their child's disability, in fear that it might end up causing some sort of like retaliation where they might lose access to supports. Have you seen that fear play out, or have you seen or heard of parents feeling or thinking that way? And I would say particularly in the school setting with like IEPs and things like that. And if you have, how do you feel like we could push back against that culture of silence if you believe it exists?
We can push back. One thing I'll say is naming disability isn't a weakness. It provides clarity. It's clarity. So it's that silence does happen because parents are scared of the backlash. I have had before where we're talking about where the political landscape is right now and all the things that are kind of happening. Before even that point, I've had many parents say, well, my child has these other diagnoses, but I don't want the district to be aware of it. Because even in those cases, I think it comes down to, again, they are worried about people's awareness of really understanding what that diagnosis is and what that may mean and how it shows up. It can, when it comes across a piece of paper in a document like an IEP or a 504, that can, again, it seems like one-dimensional. It doesn't really give the full picture. It's not necessarily what's on that paper jumps off the page, especially as it gets handed down to other administrators. And so I think what I would say about pushing back is being brave enough to speak up and to say what it is and to tell your story. That's what's missing. It's not just not so that you can tell your story for other people to exploit it and be very clear about that, but to tell their story for understanding, to give them an idea stepping into your world. It's one of the most important things that can be game changing, whether it is you talking to your administrators, talking, or you're going to go all the way as far as up to your, your school board or your state reps or to the federal level. The stories need to be told. And so that's what I would say is just being brave enough to tell your story in the best way that you know, but that without having to allow anyone to exploit your circumstances.
So I know, coming from a podcast, fellow podcaster, you've been personally really brave in speaking out, not just, on the podcast, but in rooms where it's not always welcomed. So what advice do you have for parents who maybe do want to speak up at IEP meetings or school board forums or their legislators, but they feel intimidated or like there might be some sort of retaliation or something that could impact their child directly?
So your voice doesn't need to be polished. Like, you don't have to be perfect. It just needs to be yours. So the first place to start is bringing one clear point that you refuse to back down on. So if you just start with one thing instead of like chomping and taking a bite out of taking on the whole elephant, just kind of take a bite out of that elephant. And if you need support, bring part of your posse, bring a friend. If you're in the room, you belong there. So don't ever question that. So if you have gotten yourself to be in that place, it's just start those stories, and that one thing can be the thing to shock the conscience of others enough to go, and get their wheels turning.
Yeah, I did my little stint at a board before we moved down here. The school system was honestly the reason we moved down here, because they were implementing some policies that were going to discriminate against my kids. Long story short, we moved. And what I learned from that experience is sometimes speaking is enough, and sometimes you have to basically speak with your dollar, like just take your tax dollar and move it elsewhere where they will respect your voice. And I have definitely noticed that been beneficial for us personally. So even if you feel like it's not working, you can always talk with your tax dollar.
That's right.
And one of the things that you mentioned that kind of perked my ears too is a little bit ago, you were talking about how, they wear parents down, and that's part of the reason that they kind of get away with stuff like this. And so I want to talk about systemic fatigue. So like, fighting for our kids can be really exhausting. I personally, we are actually moving out of the public school system and choosing to homeschool at some point because of this. It's just too hard to just keep fighting all day and getting phone calls every day. So what have you learned about sustaining yourself for the long haul in advocacy without burning out? Because I feel like that's that, but magnified.
Yeah, I feel like one, by the way, I haven't nailed it and made it perfect. You have to honor your own humanity in this whole entire scenario, like knowing like you're going to need time to rest. You have to make a strategy for taking breaks. Like, it's not a luxury. You have to rest. You can't like keep going. You have to impart that in. And I used to coach a lot of families on this, but I still tout this pretty frequently, is that you have to set up your systems for yourself. And that includes you have to have rescue plans, and you have to have endurance plans to take care of yourself. And they're going to change depending on the season that you're in, depending on like what's happening in your life. But it's you have to do that. But it's also building circles of people that refuel you, and really being dialed into that, and knowing that, again, it changes, it can evolve, it's not going to stay fixed. So your advocacy is not going to be sustained. I think I said that earlier, is that it can't just be sustained by being angry. And just because you rest doesn't mean you've quit. You're not quitting. You're just resting, and you're adjusting your sails, and you may need to pivot. And I surround myself with people who remind me that my child's worth isn't a debate. It's a given. Like, he's a worthy person. So, and that reminder keeps me grounded, knowing that there's a long game here. Like, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so, like, it's one of the biggest challenges, honestly. I think doesn't, even in the beginning, when your child first gets diagnosed, like saying that's your scenario, like you didn't know. Some people know their child is going to be born with a disability. Many of us, if it's our child is neurodivergent, we did not know that prior to birth. And so you kind of come strong out of the gate, and you're putting all the horses are running full speed, and you'll burn yourself out. And then sometimes also when something else happens and you get triggered and you kind of get into those cycles, it's kind of learning, going, no, this is going to be a process. And even it sounds like you've adopted that sort of mentality too. It's like, I'm not stopping, but I'm going to reassess and adjust my styles of how I'm actually going to press on to keep advocating for my children and others too, because it's not like we have these platforms for just our individual purposes. Like, it's to serve others. Yeah. And to help other people. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's part of what I'm noticing. It's being more strategic about your energy and your ability to fight the good fight, essentially. And I just feel like, for me, my personal IEP meeting battles is not the fight that I want to be spending my time on. And I'd rather fight the bigger fights that would be more meaningful, rather than focusing on just my kid. I want to make an impact where it'll help many kids. So I can't do that if I'm wasting all my energy there. So that's part of the reason why I've considered that change. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about too, is just being kind of strategic about that.
It is. And it looks different for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you talked about on the podcast at some point was about being the first in your family to break some of these cycles of silence and stigma. And I think that the way that you're talking right now kind of reflects that background that you have. So I was wondering, what has that journey been like for you personally? You know, how did you become Jean, and how did you become, this strong advocate who is feeling and thinking this way, when many people who come to this situation, like, a lot of people break, a lot of people can't handle it because of the stress and the pressure.
So it's so funny, because me and my partner actually were just having this conversation today, because it was relating to just kind of where we've come from in our lives. And we feel like there has been a common thread. I do feel like I've always been a person that's spoken up, right? Especially when the adults in the room did not speak up for me. So that was one, right? That kind of happened perpetually for me as a kid. And so that means, there was a saying too, it's like, you're only sick as your secrets. And so you have to be willing to just deal with the bare naked truth. And so it's just refusing to be silent. Now in this role, I refuse to be silent about disability, about trauma, about injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. And it can take a while to develop, because it doesn't necessarily have to be loud about it. Being silent doesn't mean you have to be the loudest voice in the room. It just requires strategy, right? And kind of harnessing, working on diplomacy. There was a term, and there was someone who wrote a book, and it's called A Peaceful Warrior. And I go, that is my goal. That's what I want to be. I want to be a peaceful warrior. Like, I'm going to be a warrior. I'm going to try my hardest to foster that in myself, is to not be so consumed, because I I can definitely be consumed by that. I'll be the first to admit that. I will always self-report.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to that though.
Yeah. That's crazy.
So I know that we've kind of dug a little deep here. It's been kind of a, I think, tougher episode to talk about, but let's talk a little more about something that might be more vulnerable here. And I just want to get your insight personally, if you're comfortable sharing. What is one of your biggest fears when it comes to how disability is treated in this country or even globally, just in general?
There's like 4 legs of this for me. One, fear of regression, like meaning like our rights will be rolled back. So I think that's like one of the top concerns for many people. Is like the first thing. It's like, wait, you're immediately going to take away my access. I think the one big one for me, and I mentioned before, is like fear of trauma being weaponized for votes. So it's like making policy out of our pain. Fear that we will regress and erase those hard fought gains. It's like thinking like about the exhaustion of just being like, how are we going to like get back to even where we were? I think that can be overwhelming. And then this one is tricky. And I do think, because this takes a certain level of awareness, and I think I'm in good company to have that conversation, but I think fears of systems valuing compliance over care. That compliance is most important. And I think we see that with people's approach to discipline and behavior with our kids. And that starts again. It's like, we haven't even gotten to the full awareness that we should be been operating at. And now we're just even going to be walking that back. And so I think instead of like they're weaponizing our pain to make policies, I feel like it will, without even that, they're not looking at evaluating the systems that actually could make it better. And then you don't even have to do those things. You don't need to talk about punitive things. You don't have to talk about taking away rights. I think we're living in a time like where context is being completely eradicated. And I think there's a lot of context and nuance around disability. And it's like going to feel like it's going to be wiped away. Yeah. We're not proof points for other people's platforms or agendas. And I think there's quite a bit of that going on. We're being used in different ways. And some people, it's like some parents, because they're so desperate for needing something to be remedied in their lives, they're like willing to accept the way that it's being utilized for potentially maybe a breadcrumb. But it's really not even that. And it's going to cause so much other harm.
I think one of the things that you mentioned there about the compliance thing, that's definitely been one of my biggest pain points when it comes to like the education system, because I feel like, well, we know historically the way that American schools originated, and the reason we have the system that we have is because it was intentionally structured to be compliance based in order to make it easier and in order to create a workforce that would be compliant. So like that is just like, that's just history, US history. But what I'm noticing is that never took into consideration disabilities. And so despite new science, new information, us now knowing about disability, it's like an antiquated system that hasn't been updated, and that thought process behind it is still in place and really difficult to get people out of that.
It is, because that's what's comfortable. And that's also what's considered normal. And we don't realize that, because people are also uncomfortable with understanding and learning the history of those things too. And part of the whole process of this, that's what I mean. Like, don't eradicate context here. We need that context. You need that historical context. That's so much a part, again, that's part of the storytelling. You cannot remedy what is going on. What is happening is that, again, there's going to be more disproportionate, just outcomes in terms of how kids are being disciplined, services for our kids, access, who's going to have access, who's not. It's going to be a completely unlevel playing field, and equity is completely out the door. The fact that the word equity is a dirty word is absolutely insane. But if it makes people feel more comfortable, I'll use words like, just depending on my audience, it's like I'll use fairness and accessibility, because what I need them to understand, what you're doing is denying access. If you're saying you care about these humans or these people and care, well, give them access to what they need. How are you going to do that? And actually trying to get them to unpack that and have conversations that way. And I'm sure that'll change too. Somehow along the way, that'll end up being a dirty word too, but hopefully not. But yeah, you hit a big thing on the head, talking about how these things have been antiquated into our systems for a long time, and people don't even realize that they've just been living in it. Like, we've all been living in it. We didn't know. And I don't know that I can admit honestly, until I lived in this world that I do now, I wouldn't have known either, quite honestly. So I get it. Got a big problem.
So I want to kind of tie this up in a more positive note at the end.
Right, yeah, I know.
So everybody out there listening, I want you guys to know, like, positivity, hope, love, embracing. So one of the things that I want to say is, the silver lining is, if these rights go to the state level, everybody out there listening, use your voice. You have a voice, and you can make more of an impact locally than you can nationally. So make sure that, you are taking that power. I know for me, like, I basically don't pay attention to national politics as much anymore, because I've learned that I can make such a bigger impact on my specific child's life locally. You, Jean, I mean, as part of the board and everything, like, you're clearly obviously seeing the same thing. So I think that that's a silver lining there. And also, to end on a positive note, let's talk about embracing autism. What does embracing autism, in light of all of this, what would that look like to you, and what would that mean to you?
So, and I like how you couch that, embracing autism, because I think embracing autism, like, that's really one of the biggest issues that we've had in society, is like defining what inclusion means. People have different filters and understanding. I think everyone kind of runs around with their own definition. But I think is that embracing it means that it's not conditional. There aren't conditions set of what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept. And it's accepting all differences and celebrating them in a positive way. I mean, everyone has values. And then when we actually do that, then we can build the very systems to meet the kids and individuals where they're at. And it's so much so that and again, that benefits the whole. This doesn't just benefit the one kid. Everything that really benefits any person with a disability truly benefits everyone. Most of society walks around benefiting from the very things, especially from an ADA perspective, from those individuals with disabilities. A lot of our conveniences, our technologies that we have, this all came out of the inception of them, was because there was a need, a specialized need by someone else. And so to me, that would be what embracing means. Like, we accept that. That's like a part of our values as a human society. Like, we accept all, and it's a human experience.
Well said. So before we head out here, I want to make sure people know where to find you. So where can people hear more of your insight, follow your work, or just, find you on social media?
So obviously our Moms Talk Autism podcast. So that's momstalkautism.com. We're on every podcast player that you can find. Our Instagram is at Moms Talk Autism. Then I have a personal Instagram at just Jean _ WM. And then I also have a trustee page for the school board. And so you can kind of follow what is happening on local policy. And even I talk about federal policy things. Our Moms Talk Autism newsletter actually has an advocacy corner in it now too. And so you can kind of keep up there. And it's trying to really help people figure out what their capacity is for at that moment, like doing self audits and picking out ways that they can advocate. People like, well, I don't even know what to do. I don't know how to do it. So all those channels, you can find me.
Thank you so much. This was one of the most honest and necessary conversations I've had in a little while. So, the truth is our kids deserve more than silence, and they deserve our advocacy, our vulnerability, and our courage to speak hard truths, even when it's uncomfortable or in fear of disagreement. So for those of you out there listening, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review if possible. And if this resonated with you, and become a member today at patreon.com/autismlish. And as always, thank you for embracing autism with me. Jean, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.